Hello.
Hey, so this is actually my first time using StreamYard or live streaming in general. So I'm trying to get the ropes here. I'm not sure how smoothly this is going to go, but I think that we are live.
Well, I have a little bit of experience doing live streaming, so if I can help in any way, just let me know.
Okay, well, first thing I had to mute the other the other link, the other tab. So that was all good. So AJ,
Yeah,
what did you think of tonight's debate? I thought Evan did actually a pretty great job, all things considered.
I thought that it was one of the best debates I've seen in a long time. I was really impressed by Evan's performance, and you know, I just thought he was pretty much keeping Kent on the ropes, and I just really liked his approach, and it was exactly the type of debate, exactly the type of debater I like to see in these um, evolution debates. Although I have to say, I didn't really understand what the title or the topic of the debate was. Like, it didn't make really sense to me. Um, do you like? It was like, what do you think? Like, it's evidence. Is there evidence that like evidence against evolution? Is that what it's talking about?
Yeah, I think that since most of Standing for Truth's debates have a fairly like standard formulaic title, I would think that Evan probably would have been the source to suggest that. And it seemed like in his introduction, what he really wanted to focus on were like the typical rebuttals that creationists offer. So he wanted to really examine, do these rebuttals actually discredit evolution or not? That would be my kind of assumption about where that came from.
Um, it says in the chat that Kennedy and him are they able to join? You have the link in the chat, right? Because that would be cool if you know.
Yeah, I think that I have pinned the link in the chat. I'd really love for some creationists to, get some cojones and join into the discussion. But, I'll just see how this goes. The link should be open to everyone. So far, I don't see anybody else backstage. So if they come in, that would be great. But since both of our questions, I think, were not asked of
Yeah,
I think
I
this could be a good opportunity to go over. So, what was your question again? I'm curious.
yeah. So this keeps happening on SFT where I will ask my question and he'll reply saying, "Hey, I got it," at which it implies that he's like written the question down or saved it, and it's going to get asked at some point. And I'm pretty sure I remember asking my question not that long after Creationist Crybaby, who always he always puts their questions up. That scoundrel. Um, but I watched the debate from the beginning, so I know because he said, "Oh well, no, I'm not going to ask you a question because I got 30 questions in 30 minutes." I'm like, okay, well, I still asked mine pretty early, but what my question said was, and I've never heard anybody ask this to Kent, which is why I wanted to ask him, is basically like, why do you keep saying that that Darwin's book, it's just on the origin of species from natural selection by favored races? Why do you say that favored races is talking about one race like white or black, one race of humans being favored in like a racist context when all favored races means in a biological sense is uh, species that are not that are extant, species that haven't gone extinct. That's all it means. But that's all I wanted to ask him. Like, why do you keep saying that? You know? But I can see that SFT wants to protect Kent from getting asked a hard question. I get it.
Well, I think it's kind of, I mean, not necessarily obvious, but I think that the reason that he does that is because obviously it's the same reason why he brings up Hitler or, all these other topics is that he wants to tie evolution in with this kind of like racist ideology. And, he wants to, throw mud on it basically. But um, so A is philosophy. I see you joined. Anything? Did you watch tonight's debate, or any thoughts you want to offer? You're a creationist, correct?
That is correct. I am a creationist. I favor the old Earth creationist model. Unfortunately, I was not able to watch almost any of the debate until literally I got in when the last question was asked. So I really can't comment on the debate itself, but I did just kind of want to join just in case something was brought up that, I might be able to respond to. I used to believe in evolution, mainly because it was taught to me in high school and I just kind of accepted it. I never really questioned it. And then when I was in college, I started thinking about it a little more, and I read a couple books on it from the intelligent design perspective, and I basically just was convinced that it's mathematically impossible that evolution happened the way that modern science teaches it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just means to me I just don't see how it could have happened with the the mutation selection mechanism currently being put forth. But anyways, I'll just kind of that's just kind of there. I can't. Yeah, I don't know what happened during the debate, so I can't comment to that.
Well, that's all right too. I mean, I'm interested in. You said you were a little bit vague about like you're saying that you no longer believed in evolution because the mutation selection mechanism is not sufficient. Can you just expand on your reason why you think that evolution as it's currently understood is impossible?
Yeah, first of all, let me ask, is this your channel, Grayson? Base Theory?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is everyone watching. This is Grayson from Standing for Truth's channel. I've made a couple appearances there, and yeah, I just made this this channel, Critical Based Theory, or just Based Theory. So yeah, brand new, still getting the hang of this and learning the ropes.
All right, good job, good job. Yeah, so basically, my understanding is that one of the main functions of DNA is to synthesize proteins, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to a lot of people who follow this debate. So this is just the arguments I've seen, and feel free to. I do have to leave about 10:30 because I do have a commitment on my own channel that I wanted to fulfill. But I just wanted to stop in but I'll listen to what you had to say in response to this one point. Basically, the probability of genetic mutations finding functional proteins in the potential sequence space and in the out of all the permutations is basically astronomically small. And when you look at how much protein machinery would have been necessary for even the simplest living organism, then it just becomes incredibly unlikely that evolution would have been able to accomplish this by mere like chemistry and forces of nature and things like that. And that's basically how I see it. So yeah, there is evidence for evolution. Like there's evidence for microevolution. I just think that like I do believe that speciation can occur, and
Well, I'd like to, if I can,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, directly address those 2 points. So, in terms of proteins, and you're saying that these odds are astronomically small, do you accept that we have observed mutations which do increase the efficiency of proteins? Like, for example, we've observed the citrate transporter in Lenski's E. coli experiment. Um, there were 2 sequential mutations, the first of which allowed the citrate transporter to function in the presence of oxygen, but at a very low efficiency. And then another mutation occurred that drastically, like by a number of, many times over, increased its efficiency in metabolizing citrate. So those are 2 examples of random mutation in the sequence of this certain protein that have increased its effective function.
And it's still an E. coli.
Yeah, Atheist Junior beat me to the punch. I mean, yeah, that there are some very interesting pieces of evidence of protein evolution. Like, I think one of the most convincing I've seen is this bacteria, which has apparently evolved the capacity to digest like plastic, nylon and plastics and things like that. So that to me is quite significant. Those are the Lenski experiments. Yeah, so some interesting things did happen in the Lenski experiments. I'm familiar with the the synthesis, the digestion of citrates in oxygenated environments, things like that. The problem is, I think the Lenski experiments are actually kind of a significant blow to evolution because of how many. Basically, when you look at the number of individuals, bacteria, E. coli bacteria in that experiment, and look at how like morphologically they have not changed. Yes, there is some change to their DNA sequencing, which improved their functioning. But if you just look at them under a microscope, they look just the same as all the other E. coli. That doesn't say they haven't changed or mutated. They have. They just look the same. So
can I ask you a quick question about
yes,
that?
Yeah.
What pressures would the Lenski experiment have imparted, like that would have caused a morphological change? Because to my knowledge, the parameters of the Lenski experiment, the actual pressures that he was putting on the E. coli were essentially which E. coli is the most efficient at metabolizing and reproducing. Like those are the only pressures that were imparted on them. So if there's no pressure for the E. coli to have a morphological change, right? There wouldn't be a morphological change that the E. coli would do that would increase its efficiency in metabolizing or in reproducing. Then why would we expect a morphological change if there is no evolutionary pressure for it? Like we did observe actual changes that increased its efficiency of replication and metabolism, which are the only things that Lenski was selecting for.
Yeah, if I could just say something real quick, like this is what Kent Hovind does that I find very annoying. It's like if you recognize the fact that they in this long-term experiment that they've had these changes from citrate, and you agree that microevolution happens and all of these other things, you can't just make an arbitrary cutoff point where you say, well, they haven't changed this much, so therefore it doesn't count as evolution. It's like, it's all evolution. As long as they're changing, as long as an organism gives birth or produces or whatever, bacteria has, they grow up and have babies. As long as its offspring is different from the parent, then that means it's evolved, because genetic mutations, the DNA is trying to replicate itself perfectly, but it's not able to. And so there's going to be mutations, and these mutations are going to get selected for. As long as that selection rate is above 0%, natural selection is eventually going to lead to new species. So I don't understand, like, how different would one of these E. coli's have to look for it to count as evolution?
All right, so we got Evan joining the screen tonight.
Well, I just want to say, I'm sorry, Evan. I hate to interrupt Grace. All I want to say is I have to dip out. I appreciate the fact that you invited me on to have this conversation. I did have a commitment at 10:30, so I just want to say thank you, and maybe we'll have another conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, it sounds good. I plan on continuing to host a lot of these after shows. So everyone's welcome from both sides of the fence. So it was good to have you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Grayson, did you know that I featured you in one of my videos, like some clips from your debate against Kent?
Yeah, I watched it.
Okay,
it was really awesome to see.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I love that debate. I really like the debate. And Evan, me and Kennedy have been talking a lot the past few days, and I have to say that your debate against Kent was really excellent. Like, I was getting extremely hyped in my chair, and the SFT chat mods were yelling at me for spamming too much, but I'm like, I don't care. Like,
I am so glad that you enjoyed it, man. I was so nervous. I wanted to come across as like genuine and humble, but also assertive, and that was like a really, really fine line to cross, because he was kind of pissing me off a little bit.
Yeah, he was doing the same thing to me because he was really like, it just seemed to me that you were making good points and challenging Kent with good questions. And then he would just, once it was his turn to talk, he would just bring up something from his script that was irrelevant to what you had just said. And it just got really old. Like, he was just repeating himself after a certain point. I can't stand when he says like, oh, the animals don't care how we classify them. It's like, yeah, they don't. And there's that is so irrelevant. Like, why are you even saying that? And he'll always say it like 4 times in a debate when he says that. It's like, it's just so meaningless.
Yep.
Like, they don't have a concept of that. Of course, it's just so stupid.
He said that, and I was literally like, what am I supposed to say to that? Is there even a coherent response I can make other than to make a loud exhale out of my nose? Like, what?
So I'm actually working on crafting some kind of response to that because I have my debate coming up with Kent in 2 days. So there's 2 angles that I'm going to be coming from. One, saying that these are not just arbitrary designations. For example, mammals. All mammals are more closely genetically related to all other mammals than they are to any non-mammal. So it's not an arbitrary classification that we have. The actual genetics supports it. And then the second thing I was going to say is that Kent's whole argument is self-defeating because after you explain an evolutionary change, Kent will say, oh, well, that's still just a cow, or that's still just a dog. And then he'll also say, oh, but these things are just arbitrary classifications that we give them. So he defeats his own points. So there are those 2 angles that I'm trying to approach it with.
Yeah, you seemed really genuinely confused when Kent said, like, talking about kissing frogs. But like the reason he says that is basically like he's saying that if the fairy tale story, a frog turns into a prince immediately, but if like a frog turns into a human over a long period of time, then that's science. But humans didn't evolve from modern frogs.
Right.
So it's just like, it's another shitty analogy. I don't think Kent understands how to make an analogy.
Yeah, I was wondering how I was supposed to like make that delineation. As I said at the top, like I don't have a background in biology, so like
that doesn't matter.
The only thing I could say is like, yeah, we share a common ancestor with frogs.
Mm-hmm.
We evolved at some point in history. We diverged from that. What else can I say from that? Like, if you're not gonna give credence to like the foundational theories, and there's nothing else I can say to you. You're just ignoring what I'm saying because you want to supplant your own version of reality, and I can't do anything about that.
But you guys are aware that different things have different information, right?
What does that even mean? That's incredibly vague.
Well, different organisms have different information. What makes them different is different information, right?
How are you defining information?
Yeah, one glass of water has different information from another glass of water too.
Yeah, but you guys know that there's a big difference in how different the information is, right?
So there's a difference in how different the information is.
Hi, may I introduce
Go ahead.
myself into this?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Hey, yeah.
Sorry that we didn't acknowledge you, Kennedy. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine, but I felt like that was perfect.
I'm a bad
timing.
host. You guys can just butt in whenever you want.
All good. I felt like that was perfect timing. Hi, Evan, my boy.
Hey, Kennedy, what's up, man?
Just nothing but praise here. Love you. Did a great job.
I agree.
You know I'm proud of you. And we knew what we're gonna do, and we're gonna stomp. Like I had a really good time watching you. No notes from what the goals of what we talked about were. Like you did. I think as long as you had fun, you did what you wanted to do successfully. I think you did a good job. And any nuances of that we could discuss when you start to work on the next debate. But yeah, really enjoyed it, man. As you know, through the Discord chat. But yeah, as you know, I'm Kennedy here. We have a show called Never Game Over. And like evolution and creationism and atheism is sort of like part and parcel to a whole project that we do. I don't know if Evan mentioned some of that, but economics and gaming and public policy from a leftist perspective is actually more of our focus and what will be part of our video stream as we start to get because we have a team that we're going to be working with coming in a few weeks. So like we want to incorporate atheism into as much as the work that we're going to be doing as possible. But yeah, like any way that we can connect in the future, and you all can like, because I've been an avid follower of both, specifically you, Grayson, and AJ, watching you all's streams and stuff. So we'd love to connect more so that we can collaborate, and so that people in my community could like learn more from non-believers, and then vice versa. Because I think, as we talk to AJ, some of the sociological stuff and responding to Kent in ways to denature some of his questions can be hard to do, and sometimes go over heads. But like, yeah, it's if we're going to be doing something new, I want to be offering something to y'all. So thank you for the time. But Jungle Jargon, please continue with whatever your question was about information.
Oh, thanks, Kennedy. You're so nice.
Well, I was going to say, like, so we've heard from some of the evolutionists present. We've got two creationists. So I was going to ask, we've got Evan in the chat, I guess, or in the stream. So any thoughts on tonight's debate from you two?
I'm just glad we didn't hear the word Negro in this debate. I'm just happy for that.
Well,
we got close.
Well, yeah, I've listened to Kent for decades now, and I'm familiar with his talking points and stuff, and it's changed a little bit over the years, but I'm just wondering whether or not you guys are hearing his side of his points that he's making. If you're hearing his side, you said maybe he's not listening to you, but are you hearing what he's saying?
I'm intimately familiar with Kent's talking points, yes.
Hey, Jungle, if I may ask, you a believer?
That's not what I said.
You were like are you a Christian?
Am I a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you don't know me?
Mm-mm.
Oh, yeah, I'm a Christian, yeah.
Hi, well, nice to meet you. And are you, if you don't mind me asking, are you North American?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I am, but I'm not, it's a complicated story, but if you want to know, I can tell you about it.
That's okay.
You
don't have to divulge or dox yourself. I was just curious, because the reason I asked only is just like or did you happen to catch my debate as well?
No, but I don't care a whole lot about doxing myself. I think I've done it many times.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Kent had to mention that Evan is from Ohio. I thought that was very not surprising at all that Kent did that, because he does that in every debate.
Yeah, I thought that was a little fussy too, but I kind of...
Well, he's got a sense of humor. It's kind of a sense of humor that he has.
I don't really see it that way. I think he just likes giving out personal information of people. So,
well, I mean, we can't agree with what everything everybody does, but it is kind of his sense of humor,
So, Jungle Jargon, what point do you think that we are not listening to Kent on? Because both AJ, myself, I'm sure Evan and Kennedy, we're pretty familiar with a lot of Kent's talking points. Whenever I'm approaching these debates, I pretty much know exactly what Kent is going to respond with. So I think that I'm able to understand his viewpoint. So what do you think it is that we're missing?
I think it goes back to the amount of information that's different between different organisms.
Can you define how you're using the word information, though, just so we know?
Well, but also, hold on. I apologize, Jungle. Just one addendum to that, too. I think it's also important to ask, how are you quantifying those differences? Are you using it by a percent basis? Because if that's how you're breaking it down, then there's very clear evidence that there are species.
If you want to go by percentage, yeah, that would work. That'd be okay.
Here's what I'm more curious about, Jungle, because it fascinating. If you didn't get to watch my debate, and that's fine, but I love Evan. I love what you did here, because I feel like watching, you can't do his script in two different ways. It's just so affirming for what I'm excited to be able to do with other creationists who I think struggle a lot harder if you're not doing this as a gimmick. Because I don't know, even just watching from him, feeling from him debating me and then watching him debate you, how much he believes in this stuff as someone who comes at this sociologically is not something I am concerned about or care about anymore. Like I do not take him at his word for his beliefs, and I don't think any person doing this for money and has made success on it can be trusted for that reason. But besides this point, like the reason I want to know, like, do you reconcile with the fact that there are Christians and like people who believe in other religions that share the same like foundations of science as us and still believe in a God? Like, where do you wrestle with that truth versus like because like we're all atheists here, right? So we believe in no God, but then there are also people who claim to follow the same religions as you do or be religious in some other way and still meet us with the same scientific principles. Like, where do you contend on that?
I don't regard evolution as a science, so you can start from there. It's just rubbish. It's total rubbish. It's complete and utter rubbish.
But that didn't answer the reason. That doesn't answer my question, and I want to be more specific because that's something
I just
that
need to
Kent
pause
says.
it for 1 second. This is my first time using StreamYard. I did not know that there was a limit of 6 people for it. So we've had somebody try to join, and I just want to, if you're listening, I want to add you, but StreamYard won't let me reach the max. So
yeah, just kick P-Town out, and then you'll be good.
And Evan and I work hours, so we won't be here too much longer anyway.
I was actually about to say, I just worked at 10 today. I got to work at 10 tomorrow. I'm exhausted. Everybody, it was awesome meeting you. I'm glad you all enjoyed the debate. If any of you have any pointers for me, please feel free to send them to Kennedy, because Kennedy will relay them my way.
Yeah, I'll stay here for a little bit and talk for us. And
Evan, I think that you did a really, really great job in the open discussion. You held Kent to a lot of his points. The only advice that I would have is for your opening statement. It was a little bit like, I know you were like reading a prepared statement, but it kind of like, you know, like a lot of your points were good in the opening, but like the tone you had was maybe like a little bit monotone. Like it was kind of a little bit like hard to really get engaged and listen because you know you definitely spoke with passion in the open debate, but maybe like try to bring that passion to the intros.
Okay, absolutely, yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah, me and Kennedy have spent a good amount of time the past couple of days like talking about his debate, and I've been trying to like give him good advice and for us to figure out some type of game plan for him in his next debate. I think today was really good, the stuff that we talked about.
Yes, it was.
I think, you know, I'd be happy to send him any notes I had. You know, really, I just I would have to think about it because as of now, I'm just pretty much like, you know, you get a gold star. I don't really have anything to complain about. But
well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so
and Kennedy got he was mad that I liked your debate more than his, and he was upset by that. But I will say that I defended
I'm a jealous princess.
Well, I defended him as being a hottie in the
those
chat
are
because
fighting
Ken
words.
was bad mouthing him, saying that he wasn't. I was like, I disagree. So.
Yeah, what the heck was that? Why was he being mean to you, Kennedy? You a hottie.
It's because I'm beautiful, and like you gotta talk about that if that's what's more important than the actual debate. But
you know,
you have the math, and that's what I'm jealous of. You know,
Kent said that if I believed like Kennedy or Evan, I would kill myself. Did he not say that?
Yes, he did.
I had no idea what to say to that.
There are so many clips.
Right after a child asked a question, too.
There are so many clips.
Oh my God, that's a whole can of worms, that girl, too. Oh my God, I can't get it.
She's 14. Like, that's so sad. That breaks my heart.
Well, Evan, greatly appreciate you joining. This is the very first time I've done a live stream. This is a new channel, so I really appreciate it, and great job tonight.
Thank you. Once again, it was awesome meeting you all. Thank you for watching and enjoying. Have a great night.
Yeah, I think you're doing good, Grace, and I think this is going good so far. You know.
Okay.
There it is.
Thank you. And so, Sunflower, first of all, I just want to say thank you for your patience. Now, I think that we have a pretty balanced after show here with 3 creationists and 3 quote unquote evolutionists. So, Sunflower, anything you want to say?
Yeah. So, you know, what I've really gathered after watching like what must be at this point hundreds of these debates, and I guess just also, you know, looking into the topic on my own, you know, having a formal background in biology or in biochemistry more specifically, having access to the academic side of it, and then also having access to some of the more crazy conspiratorial YouTube and underground stuff, is that I've really come to the conclusion that whichever side you're on, I think that people don't people, especially, and I put myself in this category too, before you have a firm platform, it's very easy to think that you're just using science or exploring science in a totally objective, unbiased way, and you're really just exploring, well, what's the best argument, what has the most evidence, and you're just it's we like to consider ourselves sort of like neutral platforms that are just very good at parsing out the best evidence. And so when you're in that position, it's extremely easy to look at any creationist or evolution denier and just find all the loopholes and, oh, here's why there's a million papers of why you're wrong. But it really does appear to me like, no, everyone is just kind of like, whatever side you're arguing on, if this is something you're arguing about, like, time and time again over the course of days, weeks, months, years, at that point, I'll accept this about myself too. To me, it's very clear that it's some form of projection or some form of frustration or insecurity about the whatever the opposition is. I think that goes for both sides. I think the creationists probably do that against the evolutionists, but I think the evolutionists do that against the creationists too. And so with that perspective, it becomes a lot, I feel like I'm a lot better equipped than I ever used to be to see when someone is really making a good argument and being unbiased and objective versus kind of just attempting to kind of put down the opposition because they're just kind of trying to fight, and they're in their own side's corner and trying to like throw a haymaker or whatever. So I think that was as much on display tonight as it ever is with all of Ken's debates. But yeah, I think that's something I've definitely grown to feel about this topic.
If I may ask, P-Town, please go ahead.
Sunflower, were you always a Christian?
No, I consider myself an agnostic theist for as long as I was old enough to have a position on the topic until I was, I guess I would say, in my early 20s, at which point I accepted Christ and decided that Christianity was true to me. Like, I believe in it, at least.
So I grew up not in a Christian family. I was an atheist, and I'm now a Christian. And it's funny that you brought up this point where, trying to put aside our predispositions and the thoughts that we already, just think we know what we already know. And then sometimes putting it on the front when we have opposition just because we're on a certain side. But I was talking to my wife, because even within me now, since I have that background of being an atheist, which was rooted really deep, I still have some of those roots there. And I was telling her a story about on a men's retreat trip. I was out in the woods and I saw an owl, and this owl swooped down. It was completely silent. It was really cool. And then it flew up into this tree, and its feathers were blend perfect with the bark of the tree. So it's an example of how evolution is still so rooted in me, because my first thought is, wow, look at that, how wonderful that evolved to do that. And then I think about how I saw this bird, an owl was brought to one of my classes when I was at a really young age, and they talked about, how it evolved to be able to turn its neck all the way around. Right. And it was like, it's still there, even though it's clearly obvious to me that God made it that way. But it's still there.
May I ask a few things for the creationists in the room? Because this is what you all display is like part and parcel to like why I'm even doing this, right? But first of all, did any of you see my debate with Ken last week? I'm Kennedy, by the way.
Oh, the black guy. What channel was it on?
Never mind. If you didn't, it's fine. Regardless,
I don't think I did. Sorry, I usually try to make them.
I would. The reason I'm curious if, like, as people who believe, where do you really contend with the fact that there, first of all, are people who believe in the, like, because what you just said is like you believe in like if you can accept Christ and evolution at the same time. You said you're an agnostic theist, right? But
I was. Now I identify as.
but now you're exorist. Like, are you? I'm assuming both of you are North Americans.
Yes.
And the reason I find that so fat, because I come at religion, right, from a sociological perspective. So I don't like the beliefs. I don't need any biology to like talk about what I call the anthropomorphic God. And what that means and what I call that is like AJ just left because he's like, oh, I need this shit. But
He's
we're
afraid
just
AJ
of
talking
always
me,
about-
runs. AJ always runs from me too.
Well, he runs whenever
Oh,
I
he's not,
show
I don't
up.
think he's running. Oh, I don't think he's running.
Let's
Oh, no,
not talk
no, he's
behind
not
his back
running.
after he
No,
left.
I
I
love
should
AJ.
Hey, wait,
I
wait.
promise you he ran because I joined. I 100%.
We don't mean it in a bad way, Grayson. Like we
Yeah,
wish
I
you
put a
did.
lot of money on that.
He said that in the chat that he was going to have to
Yeah.
be leaving soon. So he
Yeah.
announced it. He's not just running. Let's
Yeah.
not talk behind his back after he leaves. Okay, Kennedy, you continue.
Yeah, I feel bad for even making it. I didn't want to make a. Yeah, I took my comment down a road I didn't want. But no, of course, I love AJ. He's been up for so long too. But anyway, the contention that I'm trying to drive is that like if people like are able to not believe or able to believe in all sorts of different gods, right, or lack thereof, like where I find it very interesting that for North Americans the drive to then become Christian also coincides with like a lot of political beliefs. Like I'm not going to be assumptuous, but because I come from a political background, I assume that if I asked you questions about trans identity, what it means to be like what you value in like your nation state, so like should people be more Christian or secular, there's probably political questions that I can pierce out from what you describe as being Christian outwardly and holding like the views in that way, which I find this is not to like say anything about you, but I find it just fascinating as a way to start the conversation. Because right, if I'm arguing that religion is a sociological phenomenon, meaning that your journey of understanding who God is and however you define it is part and parcel with where you live, what your context is, and how you feel socially connected or lost in relation to that. So like if, for example, I'm not saying anyone here is, but like if you feel like your culture as a Western white man is losing, like falling into Christianity, but not really abiding by the tenets, but still but it making sense with evolution, seems to be very strange to me that you can pierce that out sociologically, right?
There's a lot to unpack here. I mean, there's so much to unpack here.
Yeah. Just let me clarify.
I mean,
but Christianity's worldwide.
I missed the last part. What does it have to do?
Yeah, Kennedy. The first question is: you do realize Christianity started in the Middle East, like it's not an American thing.
Mm-hmm. But and it's funny, but like that's not what you like. You fall into Christianity here and not Islam. Why? Do you
I
like?
looked into it, and it made the most sense.
When you think about that, answering that question, do you not accept the idea that there's probably a social context as to why you were more influenced by Christianity than perhaps Islam, that maybe had to do with where you lived and where you grew up, and not just the idea of making more sense?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that like I'm like somehow like a supernatural entity that can just divorce myself from any social influences, but I also like to think that I care enough about issues, especially what I would consider the most important issue, which would be the truth about God, in that I'm rigorous and I do look into it, and I do I try to
looking into it's not my contention. What I'm asking about is like, where do you consider the logic of the fact that other people from other religions also look into it and come up with different gods and have for all of human history written?
Well, I would say that the interesting thing about that is that Christianity has been responsible for the most, pole reversing dogma of people's lives, right? So if from its inception, it was literally like heretical to believe it. And yet it grew to be, look what it is today.
See, when you say that,
it's so compelling. Well, let me just finish here. I find it so compelling. And then that kind of aligns with its history and inception, in that it's not like it's not like a sort of a trivial, it's not like you can't really compare Christianity to say like, some fringe, I don't know, like Far East, like Mongolian, like, I don't know, random civilizations God belief. Because at the end of the day, when people hear about Christianity, they're more often compelled to believe in it than any other God claim on earth.
See, what you're
thousands
doing,
of years.
you are not, by just saying it that way, like to someone who knows sociology or anthropology or politics, right? In this stream, to someone who can play with the big dogs, what you're saying.
Well, you
comes
don't have
off.
to toot your own horn. We can just
I just want to make sure. I want to
argument
help.
here.
I want to help is what I'm trying to like make sure I'm making sense.
Okay, so make the
I want
argument.
to I want to make sure I'm making sense because
You don't have to say you can play with the big dogs. That doesn't really
not
get
you.
us in.
No, I'm not saying I do either. God, that's why I'm
Yeah,
here.
Kennedy, I would just say maybe like more concise.
Like when I'm saying
like,
is that
it's a bit
academic
scattered.
jargon. What I'm saying is when you're dealing with academic jargon, like the specific words that you use matter.
Am I using jargon?
No, what I'm saying is like
jargon.
the specific words that you use can be taken in specific.
So I could summarize my last point in that.
I understand what you said. I'm just
compelling.
wondering.
So do you think Christianity is not compelling?
No, that's not what I'm not. Let me be more.
Well, you're being very vague and scattered. I feel like it's hard to have a direct one-on-one with you.
Okay, what I'm directly alluding to is that like the belief that
directly alluding
to
oxymoron.
You as a
Sunflower, let him actually make a point here.
Yeah, you coming to terms with Christianity being the most insightful thing while saying like the historical reasons as to where it has to someone who knows how Rome fell, how it integrated Christianity, who's someone who knows that history. Like you're not giving credence to the ways that people who believe not in your God but still understand that history have an entirely different perception. So it's saying that the history alone and the way Christianity came to be, right, from perspectives outside comes off as extremely political, right? Because what you're saying is that you deny what other people who don't believe say, that this is actually a part of the atrocities, the cult, the identity that has now become tied to a struggling Western American political white identity.
What?
A lot of projection.
Anyone else completely lost as to what is even going on?
Of course, yeah. I mean, you may be. Please.
Can you just summarize like what thing
lost.
did I say that you disagree with or take issue with?
My issue is that you are not understanding the social. So, do you know how sociology and anthropology make arguments about?
Okay, question: is there a reason that like mathematics?
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that like the reason that Christianity spread the way that it did is not necessarily because it was something intrinsic about Christianity. It was something about the socio-political environment of the time. Like the Roman Empire and its policies were quite influential in the spread of Christianity.
Right, like Jesus.
I was answering.
It picks up right 40 years after Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. You know, the fall of Rome, and like so.
You can have your own theory. I was trying to illustrate
that I do have my own theory, but that's what I don't think you understand.
My whole point is, I
is.
wasn't raised Christian. I wasn't indoctrinated into Christianity.
I know that. I understand.
So I don't know how you're arriving at this conclusion that I like my white American identity is somehow
I'm not saying anything about you. And I think that's
exactly. You did say something like that. Yeah, you did.
Nope. I'm talking about the ideas and the topology of the ideas itself. And
so, what about like algebra? So algebra, when algebra at its inception, it also spread like wildfire. Do you think that was sociological, or do you think there was something inherently compelling and resounding, and there was a lot of veracity to what algebra taught? Do you think that that's why it caught on and spread?
Of course it's both, right? We use the Arabic number system still, right? Of course it's both. There were social reasons as to why we use that now, and there are political reasons as we don't think about it as the Arabic number system.
Is there truth to algebra though?
Truth is relative. I'm a social. You have to.
If I set up an algebraic equation.
Yeah. Okay. Sunflower, if I set up an algebraic argument that you're making would also apply to Islam and Buddhism and these other religions that spread.
No.
So when you say no immediately,
they don't compute nearly as well. No.
So when you say that, and then they say that about you, you don't feel like that itself is not political socially to people who don't even see either.
What do you mean? I have conversations with Jews and Muslims.
That's conjecture. Your conversations versus my conversations versus political research. It doesn't matter.
What do you think the issue is here? Like I still don't understand.
The issue is I don't think you all are contending with the.
He doesn't like Christian politics.
Believe in this stuff.
I don't have Christian politics for the most part. I believe in the separation of church and state.
I mean, the Bible does influence our beliefs, and it changed my perception in politics and a great many things. You know?
Yeah, I just don't. It seems like you had your own narrative,
But it's
Kennedy,
not
and
the
you're just
other-
sort of injecting it into the conversation. Frankly,
Yeah, it's a lot of
we're supposed to
Does
talk
anyone
about
else-
we're supposed to talk about science and evolution.
does anyone else feel that way? Yeah, like we were talking about evolution, and Kennedy's injecting like a like cross-sectional political identity race. Like what you're just injecting your own narrative. I think.
I'm from
Well,
South America.
he wants to have.
I wasn't even raised here. I attended a private school in South America, a private American school and Canadian.
Yeah, like we got
school.
derailed. I just like, how is this about evidence for like evolution?
It's not. So let's go.
It's not at all.
Let's
We got
change
totally
it
derailed.
back to where we're going.
And Kennedy, do you ever think that you could be wrong? Think about that.
No, but like you throw that back of like why I could be wrong, but without even answering my questions. And by like
I've answered all your questions.
You immediately cut me off. Like I said, you don't have that's a baby.
We're not really.
I'm holding your
on.
feet to the fire because you're trying to
You wanna
randomly
mute-
inject your own narrative into the debate.
You want to mute yourself for a second? I'm not injecting. Everyone's injecting a narrative right now. We're just
No, I'm
chatting.
addressing the topic that was the debate topic at tonight before this panel.
Yeah, and so am I from a different perspective that you're not hearing.
It's-
So
no.
if you're not
So-
understanding.
no,
you're not
no,
understanding-
related to evolution.
You brought up an entirely different sphere.
Sunflower.
Right.
If everyone, if you guys are all on the
Sunflower,
same
you need to
page and
understand
you want
that
to
these-
shift gears and you want to like talk more about evolution and the evidence thereof. Why
Mhm.
don't one of you creationists bring up something in relation to that topic if you don't want to discuss?
Oh, I would love to.
We could
What I
go
want to make
back
clear,
to
if I can
our
speak finally, if I
we
can
were
speak
talking
for 1
about.
second finally, what I think is really annoying is that
Finally.
as a social scientist, like you all like are just showing, like when you say that my arguments don't feel like they are relevant, right? Because what I debated Ken on, I sent him prep in advance and in my debate so that Kent and Donnie would know, right? Because what I didn't want was for them to be confused at what I know is that creationists have never heard some of the sociological, anthropological arguments about what their beliefs and identities are and how they're connected politically before. These ideas are new to some of you. You've probably heard more of the
I have a
Big Bang
degree in
cosmology.
cultural psychology. I think that
You're not the one speaking right now. You haven't also been the one responding indefensively either. So like the fact that you just immediately did says a lot. These are ideas that are defensive because they get at a deeper level than the logical scientific, right? Because if I'm
Okay.
questioning the fact that you believe not on science, but because of a political identity that you're not seeing past, that actually gets into
That's
who you
that's
are.
an
how you
accusation
think.
that's
just
wrong.
it.
It's
Kennedy,
not-
Just
Kennedy,
it.
We're
Immediately-
saying you're wrong.
I'm making this is a sociological theory.
Kennedy,
This is not a.
That's
like
what it
an
looks
basing
like.
what we
As
believe
a
on
former
truth.
Of
atheist,
course
that's what it
would
looks
look like
like.
that if you haven't heard it before and you're defensive and new to it.
It's
You know,
on
this is
Kennedy.
facts.
illustrating
We're
by
talking
I've been-
about facts. We're talking about
Yeah, I've been-
observable facts.
Have you
I've
ever
been
heard of
debating-
self-human domestication theory before?
Kennedy,
Con-
Kennedy, listen. I've been debating
Answer my
in
question.
panels like this for a long time.
Have you ever
It's-
heard of self-human domestication theory?
Kennedy, it's extremely evident that you're sort of inserting narratives into
Have
this.
you ever heard
into
of
this.
self-human domestication theory? If I'm
Listen.
inserting narratives you've never heard of before,
Kennedy.
just say you don't know it or ask me a question.
No,
but don't
Kennedy,
say it's
listen.
not relevant.
Well,
Not a
show
single
how
thing
it's
you
relevant.
brought up was even touched on in the actual debate
Grayson,
of
we need your help.
evolution versus like evidence for evolution versus.
I
not.
have a question
You
for you,
are
Grayson.
absolutely smuggling in your own topics into
No,
a debate.
Okay,
that is
yeah.
not frankly about.
I'm
Whether
or
getting
not
a little bit
beliefs-
over the back and forth between like
Your own
Kennedy and
beliefs
Sunflower
about it.
talking over each other. So P-Town, I will welcome you to ask your question.
Okay, so in the debate, Evan mentioned for as one example of a beneficial mutation, the fruit flies. In particular, the hairs grew longer. Can you clarify for me? Because I couldn't grasp his point.
Yeah, I'm
'Cause you
actually
said-
not familiar with that example of fruit fly hairs growing longer.
Well, can you give me one example of a beneficial mutation that we've observed?
Yeah, sure. Nylonase, bacteria
that?
evolving the ability to metabolize nylon.
Which
you know
is
what's interesting?
Which is everything is carbon anyways, and you shouldn't be
Is
surprised
beneficial
that they could break
A
it down.
relative word? Can different people
What's-
have
what's-
different definitions of what's beneficial?
Let me
Or is that
Let me
absolutist?
just let me just stem off this what Grayson was saying real quick. Then, so there was that example. I think I can't remember in the debate or in the comments. An example that was similar to that, Grayson. And my initial reaction was, it's kind of like, isn't it just kind of like milk with cows, just because they can produce more milk, or is this a new substance within
It is
that
an
bacteria?
entirely new family of genes that is never observed in anywhere else in nature. And nylon did not even exist as a material before the 20th century.
It's called
it's something
carbon.
that-
It's
it's a
all
new-
carbon.
Well, I mean, almost everything is carbon. That's kind of a
Yeah.
silly thing.
Exactly.
I'd have to
I
look
mean-
into the nylon thing.
So
Yeah, the nylon thing. Okay, so
just to address what Jungle Jargon was saying with it all being carbon, that's not
Yeah.
necessarily the point. The point, right, is that no other living animals can digest nylon. It's the configuration of the carbon molecules that no pre-existing
Yeah.
enzymes of any living beings could break down until
It's
a
still
mutation
carbon.
was observed in bacteria that created a new class of protein, unlike other kinds of gene families that
It's
could
still
break
just
down
carbon.
these.
That's all it is.
I
It's
once-
carbon.
I once really embarrassed myself in, I think, my senior class, where I told the classroom, "Hey, it's okay to do LSD. It's just carbon, just like food." Oh,
Yeah, it's
I'm a little
carbon.
adverse to that argument.
That was kind of
Yeah,
fun.
both coal and diamond are both pure carbon, but
Right.
there are differences in the way that these things are bonded together.
So
So
we're
they
still
figured out
we're
how to
still
break it down.
Well,
Can I
we're
wait a
still
second. Can I
operating
chime
under
in?
this presumption that it wasn't there, though. We don't know
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Maybe it was there in a smaller amount.
No, we
I
do
mean-
know it wasn't there
Mhm.
because we have
No is a
seen.
strong word. No
Well,
is
wait.
a-
May I
have-
chime in here? So
Sure.
I debated. Do you guys know Dan Stern, Dr. Dan Stern?
Yes.
Yeah, I debated him on Dapper Dino's channel around a year ago, and it was actually the whole conversation really was about this idea of irreducible complexity. That I forget the name of the guy that like coined this term. What was the guy's name?
Somebody?
I heard about it from Chuck
It's
Missler.
Michael
but
Behe.
it was-
Yeah, Michael Behe. Exactly, Michael Behe.
Behe.
So right. So
It's well
idea
beyond irreversible complexity, though. It's multiple levels of extreme complexity.
all right. Well, let me just finish my train of thought. So first of all, in Dan's debate with Behe, I don't think he ever brought up nylonase. And then in my debate with Dan, he also didn't bring up nylonase. And the reason I'm bringing, I don't know about the nylonase thing. I have to look into it. But the main contention I think that people sometimes get lost on this topic is that if you have a gene that's maybe exists but yet is turned on or off in situations where
Right.
it maybe wouldn't be. Some people, now I'm not saying that is or isn't gain of function, but I'm just saying one school of thought, just to clarify this for everyone, one school of thought is that this like doesn't, quote unquote, doesn't count because the information was already there and it was either deleted or rearranged or shifted around. And the other school of thought is more or less like, well, now you're just sort of like no true Scotsman. But the reason I'm really bringing this up is because I feel like if that was the most compelling one, I don't know why Dr. Dan wouldn't have
think-
brought it
why
up.
he wouldn't use
And,
it.
I think you have a
and
point
yeah, no,
there. I think you have a point there, Sunflower, because even our immune system relies on mutations. So are you going to say that your mutations of your immune system to combat a new virus, you're going
Right.
to say that's proof of evolution? No.
Because I'm sure we can find out and
No.
look closely at it one day and find out what type of mechanism we use to
It's-
combat that. And
It's,
Yeah, and I mean,
it's
the main
supposed
thing,
to
So-
mutate. The immune system is supposed to mutate
So-
in order to combat the virus. And it
and
does it
one
all
last
the
point,
time.
one
It
last
does it all the
point.
time.
One last point. What Michael Behe really says that Dr. Dan never addresses is that Michael Behe asks Dr. Dan, he says, is there a case where there's two proteins joining together to form a new novel function? And Dr. Dan and Dr. Dan, I think, has admitted, no, this has never been observed, right? So essentially, there's one Michael Behe was arguing for irreducible complexity. His idea is like the mousetrap, right? His idea is that okay, if you have the wooden block and the
Right.
and the snap and the wire and the hammer or whatever or the cheese, yeah, if you have all those things individually, he says like you still need. There's no we've never observed them all getting combined to form a mousetrap randomly, right? That's exactly. So he's saying he wants to observe multiple discrete parts come together and sort of synchronize to have a novel function.
And there's so many examples of that in nature. Yeah, what you're saying is like there's 4 mechanisms to make a mousetrap. If you only have 3 of those mechanisms, you don't kill, 3/4 of the mice. It just doesn't work.
Well, even if you have all 4 of them and you just put them in a room and wait,
they're not going to put themselves together.
How many years? Yeah, so that's sort of the argument,
Okay, this is really annoying because
you said just one more thing to add, like 3 things ago. But jungle jargon, just to address your point, what you seem to be describing comes across like theistic evolution. Like you're saying that yes, these mutations do happen. Yes, they add beneficial information, but God designed them that way.
Variation is not evolution. Adapting to the
says who?
Jungle's breaking up.
You're roboting, dude. But this is
so if Grayson, if you define change as just or evolution is just change, this is what evolutionists do all the time. Jungle jargon, your mic's not working.
This is really annoying because I hate that you keep calling us evolutionists, but you want to say that it's irrelevant to talk about the social political aspects of other people claiming to be Christians.
Dude, get out of here with the social political. You're playing
Grayson,
the victim.
Are you incapable of understanding things?
You're not adding to the conversation, dude. I've seen your type before.
Beautiful.
It's you are wasting everyone's time. Just head out, dude. Just head out, man. Yeah.
I want to ask one question.
We don't need you smuggling in socioeconomic, nonsense.
Are you that lame? Are you that lame?
Yeah, I'm that lame. I'm not. Just leave, dude. It's not your. It's not. I'm sure you have good points, but this is not the time or place or forum for you to smuggle in these.
I'm sorry, you can't handle learning things that you've never heard before.
You don't have to.
To clarify, this after show doesn't really have a predefined topic.
It's not about the debate.
It says evolution debate
after show.
Yeah, it's loose.
And
it's the first time I've streamed on this channel. The after show is just to
and Evan's the co-host
about evolution
for my show.
Kennedy, everything you say is like a far left buzzword. I've never
just illustrating not understanding.
I've never seen
a little bit more than that. Like
blatant attempt at smuggling in progressive, like new wave liberal ideas into an unrelated topic.
Argument.
This is
Sunflower. Just let him embarrass himself for a little while.
Immature.
You might as well just let me talk and embarrass myself.
It's so immature.
Sunflower, could you stop interrupting? I mean, like,
just
I understand that you don't want to let him talk, but
I'm just going to say one question and then leave.
To just keep interrupting it does get annoying.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask one question and then leave because first of all, I just want to blurb, follow us on Never Game Over. Come ask us questions. We can chat more in the Discord and have like some conversations because I love to do this, right? I care about the reason that I had a debate with Kent before Evan, and we scheduled this and we worked on this together. He's my buddy, and we worked on these debates. Is because like our focus.
Kennedy, my man, you gotta work on brevity.
Yeah, I understand that. Ridiculous. I've never seen anything like it. It's like
Sunflower, just like stop Sunflower. Let's let him go.
Yeah, clinical narcissism in the academic world, and tailoring my jargon is difficult, and I want people to push me on that. But you got to asking me a question versus saying that something is irrelevant because you don't understand it comes off extremely defensive to someone.
No, it's narcissistic rambling. That's what it is, dude.
Okay,
you need help.
Argument.
You need counseling.
As long as I can get to mine.
You need counseling, dude.
Sunflower, please.
You can project another day.
He's almost done.
I'm almost done. You can project another day and like think about it when you go to sleep.
Hey,
so like what I'm trying to, what I'm curious about is just if you all can contend with the idea, if what I'm saying is not true, or is true, like if there is some sort of relevance to the idea that there's an identity that you've gravitated towards because of a social political context that you grew up in and have a value statement towards, right? And like I admire and love, and I said this in my debate, that what was a lesson for me was that there were atheists like Richard Dawkins and people that are transphobic that I found that I could not agree with politically, right? So their view of God, and in my perspective, growing up, in Jesuit school, never having believed ever in a God, but like still understanding that people could fall into the same values and political systems and understandings as me while still having and changing their ideas of God. That was a very good lesson for me to learn in my upbringing. So what I wrestle
Thanks
with,
for your
and why
life
I love
story.
this-
You're just monologuing again.
I
dude.
love that you just jumped in when
You're
I
just-
wasn't done.
You're literally
You can really
go
go
10 seconds
project
without
with someone
monologuing.
else.
Hey,
Anyway,
Kennedy,
I was almost
I've been
done.
listening for a bit. I was
almost done.
hoping I could say something to you before you left.
But if I can finish real quick. So my point of bringing up the fact that like religious people versus atheist people versus what you believe, because right, when you're debating about it when it comes to evolution, if someone is saying your belief has a political harm, right, you have two options. You can just throw them back and say like, here is this thing that is not relevant. But if I'm right about that, right, you're responding in a way that for people when they look at you and look at your legacy and the fact that you're losing a political battle, ultimately, if someone's arguing that, right, to other people outside of your bubble, you're not making an argument. And that's why I'm really curious about what is the identity you all wrestle with, and contending with the fact that there are people who believe in what we believe and still claim to be all sorts of different religions. And then other people who are atheists who make sense to you but don't really fit what I think is more important with how the world can be beautiful, you know, like how you can understand the story of humanity and how like anthropology, the things that I focused on, the story of us, how we were more egalitarian in our past, all of that shit, those stories that I care about, it's not really caught in the zeitgeist yet. Like, how do you wrestle with those things? Like, that's what
Okay, I'll jump in now.
Thank you.
Okay. My brother-in-law is a theistic evolutionist. I found out recently. I've talked to him a lot about my beliefs.
Cool.
He was a part of what, as I was from my transition from being an atheist to being a Christian. He didn't have a direct impact on me. But there's a lot of things about Christians that you'll see where they'll be the first ones to be at the hospital helping people. Now, I don't want to overgeneralize, but most people come to Christianity, you know, just because of what they experience from those people, and that's a lot of what the Bible teaches. But I'm more of a logical thinking approach type of person where I got to make sense of it, pretty much prove it in order to believe it, in a sense. So, but how do I wrestle with that with my brother-in-law? Because I see a direct contradiction between what the Bible actually says and evolution. But you can take a literary instead of a literal interpretation of the book. It still doesn't change your salvation in Christ, the foundational things that we believe. But I see the huge dangers in it. Why? Because I was once an atheist. You go hang out with any of these atheist channels, these little subcultures. Evolution is brought up all the time. And you know what? At least they're willing to have the conversation. At least, even when we're just tiny, we're going to go and the first thing we're going to think of is, you know, where did I come from? Why am I here? What made this? Eventually we're going to have that thought, right? And it's important to have those discussions. Right now, it's more or less taboo, but it's okay to have political conversations and disagreements, apparently.
All with you,
but,
here, man. Yes.
But what I, from my perspective, a lot of my politics and a lot of my stuff has changed since I became a Christian. I can't pinpoint exactly everything, but the foundational aspects of it are because of what I know the Bible says. So when it comes to transgenderism, you can go to Romans 1, look at what it says. It's accurate, it's scientific, it's measurable, right? But the distinction is we don't know if it's a judgment between a culture or a person. So we're also taught to always love one another and to not judge. Okay, so, but at the same time, it's portrayed that type of behavior is a sin, while at the same time, there's an apparent contradiction where possibly it's a judgment upon a culture where there's going to be more transgenderism, more gay people. I don't have all the answers to that. When it comes to communism, when it comes to versus, or if you just want to be Republican or Democrat, I was so far left. When I took the test, my teacher didn't even believe that I actually took the test seriously because that's how far left I was. Now I'm probably so far right, it's silly. But I haven't changed as a person. This is why. Here's an example. One of the biggest arguments when it comes to is helping people. See, a far leftist thinks, oh, it should be, you give money to the government so they can disperse it out to the people. I still believe in helping people. I just now believe in helping people directly.
And
see what I'm saying?
Before I let you go, I want you to say that like your perspective on like theology is like well profound. I really, not only do I appreciate it, like I wish people would be more willing to wrestle with it like that. And I hope we can talk more. Like, hope you hit me and Evan up, and we would love to have you specifically go on our show to talk about that. And what I want to leave with you to wrestle with specifically is for someone who has never believed in it, but has like grown up going through Christian organizations, where for you do you see the possibility that like the empowering, I guess, nature that scripture has on people? And I think social political reasons, like, because I'm assuming you're a North American, where does it lead the possibility that maybe because of what we know about science and evidence, and I think a lot of Jewish communities do this, like holding true to the non-literal aspects of scripture and the importance of promoting, what Jesus was doing as like a moral, social like aspect of life, regardless if he did supernatural stuff. If none of what the Bible's miracles are is true, from my perspective, as someone who never believed in it, it still holds social, moral, political value for how you wrestle with stuff. And I think
right. And yet you're not a Christian though, right?
Yeah.
So what you're seeing is when it comes the bottom line is we're at war here. The Bible in a way defines it as a cosmic warfare. And the weapons that are at war are portrayed throughout the Bible by the enemy as being the appearance of good, or half truths, half lies. It starts with the snake in the garden. Hath God not said that you can eat of any tree in the garden? Yeah, God did say you could eat of any tree in the garden, except this one. But, so the snake, the adversary, is tricky. So if you come in and say, oh, yeah, look, Jesus was a really moral person, but he didn't perform any miracles. Or if you want to be like a Muslim and say, oh, yeah, he was born of a virgin, but he didn't actually die on the cross and resurrect and conquer death. No, but he is going to come back again in the end. It's just an anti-Christian approach to viewing things. My point of all this is that you got to watch out for the half-truths. So Grayson and I have a lot more in common than I do with a lot of Christians, and the fact that we want to have this open discussion, and we're going to go nitty-gritty with each other, toe-to-toe, but ultimately we are pursuing truth, hopefully, if we can reserve our other agendas. But the reason why I'm up here talking isn't to have a YouTube channel. The reason why I'm here is because the Bible tells me to do it, because it's been proven to me that the Bible is true. And the Bible tells me I was supposed to come up here and teach and share the word. And hopefully one day I'll be rewarded with a crown of righteousness. And I don't know what that is, but I would like one.
Yeah, and what I want to leave you with, and with you all with that, is like, is it still possible for your perception of your life to be beautiful and the work that you're trying to do? And what I think I still vibe with some of the political things I could maybe even change you on, is your worldview still possible to be meaningful if all the supernatural aspects of this book aren't true through the evidence that you end up finding and discovering through changes? Like you used to be an atheist, so if you happen to change again, I think what'll be interesting for your wrestling and how you perceive yourself and your mission is how you can still see those stories and that experience is beautiful, even if the stories themselves aren't true, right? Because in America specifically, we have all stories that aren't true that people gravitate towards all the time. Dragon Ball Z and Star Wars are not real, but they're definitely a part of our social political zeitgeist. Like all sorts of stories and things we have aren't real that then affect who we are and who we do, and it could still be beautiful and hold more.
I'm going to try and tie this into evolution, okay, Grayson? Katie, and I'm going to cut you off just for the sake of the chat.
And I'll be listening, but I'll be gone here.
Okay, to answer your question, let me explain to you a few points that I had when I was an evolutionist. See, I took it seriously, not believing in God. And when you approach society in that sense, there's a lot of things that you can do to benefit society as a whole. You have a different, less so individualistic aspect, a different identity of what's beautiful in the world. And there's all types of things that can change it. You can enforce people to get driver's license to have babies, right? You can really push abortion. You can actually do genetic, you can do genetic testing and artificial insemination. We can grow babies in pods, right? It'll all be beneficial. We can get rid of people's emotions. right? Because
When you
emotions
ask a
just
quick
get in the way.
question,
Wait,
when you
The
ask
point is,
can I push back
before
on that?
this is my view when I was an atheist. But let me just finish by
yeah,
saying
that
this.
was your view.
As a
That's why I was
Christian
curious.
now, just because I believe that Christianity is beneficial for society, you can't use that, say, oh, it's beneficial society, therefore we must push Christianity.
Well, what I want to
Christianity is
just
true
quickly
because
ask,
the God of
do
the
you think
Bible is
that-
true and Jesus Christ is true.
do you think that's just true for you or true for everyone? That's what I'm curious about, because like that can make sense for you and your journey, and like that's where
For
I put
everyone
religion
who
at the
will
door.
believe.
But do you think that's true for everyone, right? Do you think it's impossible for example, a religious person to like fund and do all the leftist stuff that you hate, and then for an atheist to fund and do all the religious stuff that you want? Are those two things possible for people to do with their votes and time and money? Because I have seen and experienced that it is possible and people do. So like I don't think it's black and white in how people's views then come out to those experiences, which is why I think it's cool that it's driving you to move, and why I think you could let it go and let it move you in a different way if you allowed it to. And that's why I presented it that way, because when
Okay,
people that's why I was
now,
curious.
Could you answer that really?
Yeah, I'll just
briefly,
summarize by
because-
saying this.
Wait, before you go off, just in a brief manner, just because we've had like I think Jones has been trying to say something, and I think he had a question for you and for Kennedy, and I think he wanted to push back against something you were saying, and then I think KJV was trying to talk. So, just trying to get some of the other voices in.
Yeah, 10 seconds, I think. If I can remember what I was going to say.
He was just asking, is it possible for atheists and
I know.
have these
So,
kind of varied
I'm not
beliefs?
gonna answer that question directly, but I'll tell you this: the older we get, and the basis of what we believe, we as Christians are more concerned not about this life, but about what's next, and that shapes and answers your question if you think about it yourself.
Okay, cool. I'll throw it to Jones now.
Hold on. I'm actually going to switch to a different computer so that you can hear me a little bit better.
Okay, well, never mind. KJV, were you trying to add something?
Oh yeah, I was not an atheist, but an agnostic until I was in my early 20s. I wouldn't accept a bit of scripture, not one bit. But you know what? God used the things in the world around me to show that He was real, and not only that, but He clearly led me to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, it was. I was the same way. It took me a long time. I think I was led to Jesus before I actually studied the Bible. To be honest with you, I mean that was the glue, though, for me.
Well, the devil was bringing counterfeits all over the place. I never worked in front of around his. I didn't even know what a Jehovah's Witness was, and suddenly I was working around them. They were at my girlfriend's house. They were at my house. I was running into them everywhere I go.
Okay,
the devil
Jones.
was definitely trying to put his false trail out in front of me.
Jones, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
Go for it.
Cool. So, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of got lost in the sauce there because it seemed like we moved back and forth a lot between.
I do that. I'm sorry.
Two completely different conversations. So
That's what I do, baby.
I'm gonna have to cycle out because I'm completely lost around now. Originally, I was wanting to ask Kennedy something about whether or not this was a conversation to be had at the same time as evolution, because while I think you're objectively right, I feel like it's like 5 steps ahead of a concept of evolution just on its own.
Oh, if I can answer that before because I got to get out of here, but like, thank you for saying that, because like it's part and parcel of two things. And with musician here earlier, I'm sorry that he was very, very defensive, and it seems like things are quiet down now. But like, thank you for asking it that way, because what I think I'm offering, and I hope you all watch my debate with Kent too and compare it with Evans, because what I'm trying to offer is that most atheists, most of the prominent ones, right, have not spent time committing to the zeitgeist that I'm assuming all of you have spent time researching and debating using sociological and anthropological arguments that I'm presenting. And because I'm also like a Black person, to make that clear, like how that comes off to the audience relative to who the atheist and creationist audience is immediately going to be perceived difficult because it is new to a lot of people. So I want to try to be as like, come on, even though it feels new and defensive, I want to try to like show as much love as I can, you know, because my ultimate goal in pursuing my persuasion is to meet people where I meet people politically in the same place, and then wrestle with whatever their definition of God is after that. Because of that, and I think that's where I can debate people like Kent and argue because if I'm arguing that your belief system, especially in the way that it's being presented, is political, because not every theist will do that. I can listen in and I will point out when I think a theist is doing it. And an atheist pointing out something that sounds theist, even though it's not, but they're using like the state, for example, to promote something that's semi-religious. Like I point out the same things, and I find myself even getting more trouble with atheists than I do Christians. And from my experience growing up, you know, so I take seriously that these things don't have to meet in the same values, but there's definitely the driving foundational force. And so evolution can't really separate from it, right? Because when I debated Kant, he brought up Negro and Darwin because like he had no responses to me, and like he had a good time. Him and Donnie made it clear that like they want to chat and debate with me more, but like you gotta like I did what I had to do because I know that like these arguments deeply have political things connected to them, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not. And all I can do is comfortably try to drag that out in persuasion. But like, if that is my central point, like it is always going to be relevant from my topology and my argument, you know, like I can't, it will be, because that's what I'm arguing, and it will sound new, similar to how people argued that phrenology isn't real and used all sorts of different social sciences that are now commonplace to make sure that didn't become the zeitgeist that we use. You know, phrenology is it's not a thing that came out of evolution too, right? And it's no longer a part of like commonplace because it wasn't just evolutionists that got that to be denatured as a working theory that we would all accept. And seeing, because we saw the racism and the connections behind not really subscribing to it. And I don't think we can not believe that sort of can't happen with our ideas now. So that's what I'm trying to push, and I'm trying to do my best, because there's not a lot of people out here doing this. Most of the sociological researchers don't think that this is worth their time, and I don't believe them for that. But I think that's what I'm trying to do, is to bring more attention to it so that it eventually will be.
I guess my issue is I feel like in doing that in that manner, or in this manner, you do like the opposite of what you set out to do, right? Because the whole crux of what you were saying when you were going back and forth with Sunflower was you were asking him to be aware of why he found Christianity to be the most compelling version of creationism based on his geography. Now, of course, I know exactly what you were saying. That makes perfect sense. If he had been born in Iran, he'd be Muslim. Yeah, I know what you're saying, but you're asking him to be self-aware that of the Kool-Aid that he's drinking, but then you're sort of the conversation goes in a way where of course he's going to get defensive, and then nothing productive comes of it. It's very predictable where it goes. No, but I already agree with you.
That's what I'm saying.
You spent 30 minutes telling me things that I already knew. You were trying to have a conversation with someone who disagreed with you on every level. And at that point, you failed to do it.
I don't think that's a failure. And you illustrated that by illustrating that you had a different response to it. Like, because what I'm doing is presenting something that isn't exactly heard of and presented in that way. But like, I can't help the defensiveness.
Response to it from someone who already knows what you're saying, agrees with it, and that is not new information for it. Of course, my response would be different. It's the one you would want.
But you also didn't accept my premise, which makes like wrestling with the actual topology of your belief, from my perspective, easier for me if you accept that. If you get defensive about it and then don't want to wrestle with me, like how is that any different than a flat earther then who says, well, here's why NASA and my conspiracy theory, and gets mad about it too? Like, I don't want to make that as a jump to the argument, but like that's how bringing up sociology and political stuff.
But no, that's actually
like part and parcel to the work.
Point, right? If you were arguing with a flat earther, you wouldn't make it political at all.
Oh, you would.
No,
Oh,
you
yes, you
really
would.
would not want to do that because you would get nowhere with anybody and
I
you'd waste an
disagree
hour and a
completely.
half.
I completely
you did
disagree.
with
I mean,
the last guy
conspiracy
you talked
theory
to.
researchers who have gotten people out of that disagree with that. How do you move someone out of what you classify as a conspiracy theory? It requires an active like working towards defensiveness and like honestly, part of that is empathy and like still wanting to establish that you care about that person through the fact that they're being defensive, which is what I hopefully tried to do. But like, you can't stop.
You were being just as argumentative with him. It was just a back and forth. It was.
Well, I'm sorry you perceived it that way, but I hope you understand it's not my goal.
Kennedy, and we apologize. It's just the majority. Like we had up to I think 20 people watching. Where we've been stuck on 8, and I think a lot of people came here to talk about evolution and the disagreements that we have, not the sociological aspects of it. I think that's a different thing.
And I know,
and the fact, but you're right. It is why we're here. I mean,
know
it's a huge aspect of it. Go read Romans 1 and tell me if the Bible's true.
No, but that's why I'm here. Like I'm here to add something. If you all are here to talk about evolution, and you've done that many a times, with a lot of different people. I'm here to add something new, and I'm going to do my best to do that. But it will come off new, and I will give you the hope is that I'm interesting enough, at least, that you will ask me, okay, what's the research behind this shit that you're saying, and so I can give you, and we can talk more, so that you can hopefully be persuaded by what I'm trying to argue. Because what you're doing in the initial responses to being somewhat defensive or somewhat not understanding its relevance to what I'm arguing. It's showcasing that, like, this is why atheism and Christianity debates haven't really caught on to this, and why people who do this other part of the research don't dive into this either. Like,
you haven't really had a premise to what you want to, and it hasn't really. It doesn't have a definitive direction to it.
No, I mean it does, but that's sort of my point. Is I'm sorry to say you're here to have a conversation about evolution. It's not going to land. It never will. So he's talking at you, not with you, when he's having these conversations. Dude, I promise you, I listen very closely to you guys going back and forth. You guys were talking at each other, both of you.
Well,
there was no conversation being had. I don't know. Does anyone disagree with that?
We don't have an exact, like, it sounds like to me the topic that he wants to cover is the beginning of a very complicated and broad topic that we're not here to talk about.
I mean, at no point are you all giving me any affirmation that, like, you maybe just don't like you have not given me any credence about maybe I'm presenting things you have not heard before, and like maybe you want to learn about them later. Like, at what point are you going to just
so far we don't disagree with you,
but you're not. That's not what I said. Disagreeing is not what I'm saying. Like, you're not illustrating that if this doesn't feel relevant to you, and if this doesn't seem like it makes sense, because that's what you're saying from an academic professor perspective. I
wanted to talk about the hair on flies, Grayson, not the sociological aspects. Like,
and that's fine. You can tell me.
I wanted to talk to Grayson about how his best example for beneficial mutation is a little tiny meaningless chemical that a bacteria made. And why is that his best when there's an owl that has the owl's feathers and its neck can turn around and it can fly silently?
And
teach me how those things evolved.
I have it. And all I'm saying is that you can learn that in the biology class. And all I'm saying is I'm coming here. If this is a conversation about religion, I'm going to get into why people believe in the first place as the central point of importance. And if that seems like it's not relevant, I apologize. But it is and always will be, regardless of how much it makes people uncomfortable or feels like it's a lot of different topics or too broad or too many aspects. Like, if you're not asking questions and being like, here's where you, because what other people do who know the actual research will say, like,
before you get into what other people do, that I appreciate the points that you bring up and the perspective that you've been adding. I do. My main issue, and what I think that Jones was talking about like talking past each other, is that we never got to the point where you could have this conversation about why Sunflower believes the things that he does, because, like, and this is just my take on it, but I think that you were not asking, like, straightforward, direct questions. Like, and you know this too because you talk about how you like tend to like ramble on about a lot of topics. But I really do think that like focusing on being concise and asking Sunflower like a direct question about like or just like being able to make your point, because I mean there's been a lot of times here where like I'm just kind of waiting for you to like make your point and then you just like keep on going, you know? And it's like at what point like is Sunflower going to be able to respond, or is like what even is he responding to? I think it gets a little bit lost in the weeds if you're not being like, okay, so Sunflower, you know, you did ask like why Christianity versus Islam, but then the conversation just kind of devolved from there.
That's fair, and I want it to be concise because I do think this will feel new to a lot of people, and trying to seed these arguments into what has been lost in atheism is something I want to be better at. So like I appreciate that, but what I want and what I hope you all look back on is like that. It feels like since he's gone, like the conversation has flowed a lot more sensible and nicer. It does feel like when he was speaking, it was a lot more defensive and trying to jump in when I was talking.
Well,
right. So like what was
him and Jungle Jargon do tend to like sort of interrupt and insert
which is fine. Which is fine. Which is why
it happens. But I think that like it could have been addressed very simply by like maybe asking Sunflower, like, do you think maybe there were political reasons why Christianity spread?
I did hear that, and remember his response was that it's not relevant and that I'm doing leftism. You know, like
I don't think that would have been his response if you had asked him that question. Like right when he said, you know, okay, so the reason Christianity spread was that nobody has ever found a religion that's been more compelling, and then he could just say, like, do you think maybe there are other reasons, like maybe political reasons having to do with the Roman Empire for that spread? Like, you know, just like asking a clean, like efficient like question rather than like kind of, you know, kind of arriving at your point through a whole like paragraph.
But that's what you like set out to do though, because like you even said that you would say things at him. You would arrive at the conclusions for him, tell him the conclusion, and then have him accept it. And what you would want from him was for him to ask you questions. And it's just, I just don't see that as ever being all that productive.
I don't think I was setting any. You'd have to be more specific.
You said that verbatim. You said
be more. There's no way I said that verbatim, so you're gonna have to be specific.
You said that to me verbatim less than 5 minutes
ago.
There's
no way I used those words. Can you be specific?
You said you guys aren't asking me questions.
All the Bible prophecies that have been fulfilled, like Israel being returned to their land in 1948.
What?
What is that? What
Bible prophecies? Israel being returned to their land in 1948 is one of them.
Oh, well, okay.
I don't recall saying that. I'm so confused now. I didn't
never
say
mind. Actually, what you're doing is great. I'm fine with that. I just remembered what the alternative is.
What?
Nothing.
Now I'm lost in the sauce.
No, I'm sarcastic.
Austin, tonight.
He was saying that never mind, what you're doing is great because the alternative is talking about biblical prophecies.
Oh.
Well, I guess
you all are closer to me with that not being fun.
I was kind of a delayed comment.
It's a joke. It's just because it came from nowhere. Like that's it. It was just because it was like really out of nowhere.
Like I said, it was a delayed comment. It really fit better 10 minutes ago.
Well, like I'm about to head out of here, but like this was fun. I appreciate especially what P-Town you said earlier, like in Austin, your question, and Grayson, your perspective, like in even your prophecies. So like, yeah, thank you all for like what you've provided, and hopefully you follow the channel. Me and Evan are going to be debating with Kent again. So hopefully you just reach out to us. And again, your criticism is warranted. Even if I sound defensive, know that like I love chatting, and like I push back because I'm trying to learn too. So like, thanks.
Sweet, thanks. Well, it was a very interesting perspective that you bring, and I appreciate it. And also, I will be debating Kent in 2 days.
So. Oh yeah, I'll be watching.
How do you explain the multiple levels of extreme complexity, even for a cell, but even on a lot other higher levels?
with evolution.
Yeah, with evolution. There's just too much to happen without a designer. Too much has to happen.
I don't
the
agree
very
with
same
that. I mean,
time.
we see things increase in complexity all the time.
Well, Grayson, back pertaining to what he was saying when it comes to the single-celled organism, for years that was pushed hard, the simple cell, and then when we were able to look closer at it, it's not simple at all.
Well,
not
it's
like
still
what evolution.
more simple than the alternative, right? Which is a multicellular organism, which is necessarily more complicated than a single cell. So by comparison, yes, a single cell is still simple.
Well, just like the mousetrap.
Hey, but the mousetrap is not irreducibly complex.
Minimum of 470 specific proteins. You got to have a minimum of 8 specific parts to a cell, and then you got to have 10 specific functions.
Yeah, to a modern cell, yes.
Well,
well,
actually, a simple cell would have to be, all the parts would have to be more complex to fulfill the functions that are needed.
No.
Yes, they would. They'd have to be more complex.
Again, I reject that. I think that that's a faulty assumption on your part.
How do you get the first cell ever to know how to duplicate itself? Without the proper mechanisms to do so, we'd have 2 dead organisms.
Because replication was already in play before the first cell.
Yeah, well, how would you ever get the concentrations needed? The concentrations are way too high to have all of them show up at the very same point, to the size of a pin head or a pinpoint.
But that's not what he was saying. What he said is that replication happened before the cell. So you would have to go back to where replication happened and start the conversation there.
Would that be RNA in your mind, Grayson?
No.
Okay.
Well, RNA
how can you replicate something before it exists? That doesn't.
Well, you're not replicating anything before it exists. The replication would not be of a cell. The replication would be of like simple, like organic molecules, such as like proteins or like lipid bilayers, or of metabolic like transitionary compound. So there's a number of different
with all their specialized machines
things for the first self-replicating system, but all of these things are way before you get the first cell.
Even with all their specialized machines and purified samples, they can't even come close to a cell. How is it going to happen when you don't have these things?
Okay, so here, I got a good one for you, I think, Grayson. And I didn't mean to, I'm sorry, God's word. What about, how did viruses evolve then?
We don't know. It could have viruses could have evolved from like other existing organisms as like an offshoot of their genes, like a transposon system that began to cross species could have evolved into a virus, but we don't really know.
To be from a defective cell. That's why so many viruses are so species specific. Like there are a lot of viruses that you can get, but your dog never will, even though he's in the same house.
What does that have to do with a defective cell?
Well, you're subject to it because it's from your DNA.
So you believe that a human virus came from a human and not other viruses?
Exactly.
Yeah, I would just like to say that we do have numerous examples. Hold on, KGB. We do have.
That don't have evolution.
Hold on, KGB. Okay.
Agenda.
So we do have numerous examples of viruses crossing from one species to the other. So, I mean, this is known and documented.
COVID-19 came from bats, right? I mean...
Yeah, bats and pangolins.
And I'm pretty sure, like, household animals can get COVID-19. So, I guess you could say that you believe that, like, all mammalian viruses just evolved out of mammalian cells, but I don't know that that's true. I think all viruses are much more closely related than any virus to any of its hosts. I don't really think that makes sense or would even be something that I would think of.
Well,
I mean, the point.
There have been cases like with the bird flu and the swine flu where it has crossed over, but it's the exception, not the rule. I mean,
No, it's the rule. It's like most viruses. Can you name any viruses that only attack one species? And I can name like 5 that attack multiple for every one that you can name.
To be fair, there are examples of viruses that are like highly species specific, and it's entirely possible that viruses like did have an origin in certain species. I'm not ruling that out, but it's not like no one has the authority to say that that's the exception rather than the rule. I mean, KGV is most likely not a virologist.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking of like every virus we know of, right? Like rabies, multiple species, almost every mammal.
I honestly feel like the virus topic is like a little bit off topic from what we were talking about. I mean, I've admitted the fact that the origin of viruses is not known.
That's basically all I was trying to. I wasn't trying. I was just trying to make a point that you have a little tiny microscopic thing that needs DNA in order to replicate, right? And doesn't have DNA itself.
But it's got to be
we don't know. We don't know, how it, quote unquote, evolved.
It's got to have a close enough commonality with your own DNA in order to trick the cell into duplicating it.
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
So maybe KJV is a virologist over here, ladies and gentlemen. But my main point.
No, I just listen to a lot of smart people.
Okay, my main point is that self-replicating systems can exist without any DNA or any fully formed cells. You can have metabolic pathways, like actual like chemical reactions that are self-replicating. This is in systems chemistry. You can have lipids, right? Lipids just in the environment will self-replicate like without any kind of like programming or anything to speak of. It's just the environment causes them to like break in two, and then if there are any chemicals like embedded in the membrane, then you're going to be passing on information from parent to daughter like without any kind of like genetic code or anything like that, or any cell present.
But a lipid isn't alive.
The simplest parts of a cell.
My point is that you're never going to go from the point where you can say 100% you go from this thing is not alive and then this is alive. Like there's a huge gray area within like this systems chemistry and like what is the first thing that's alive. It's not necessarily a hard cut boundary like that. Like viruses are not classified as alive, but they're kind of in a weird gray area of if they're alive. Like viruses can die, but they're not alive. Like there's a huge gray area. It's not like
well, there are some defining characteristics that we could use and agree upon, hopefully, because you can say that they move by themselves.
Yes, we could, and then we could show that there are precursors that meet some of these criteria, but not all of them, right? And so the line gets very blurred when you start like thinking about how these things could have arisen.
But my premise is there is no such thing as a simple cell, though, Grayson. Right?
It's all relative, right? There are some cells that are more simple compared to other cells, like, right?
But you would agree that there is no such thing as a simple cell.
No, because all the simple by definition is a relative term, right? If you just say something is simple, there's no meaning in that statement unless it's relative to something else. Like
sure, relative to you, as you define simple, is there such thing as a simple cell?
Yeah.
As you define
relative
simple.
To me, I'm a multicellular organism. I have like 1 trillion cells. So
no, your definition of simple.
When Grayson says relative, he's not saying relative to him like what each of us individually personally means simple. He's saying what you're describing as the simple missing link cell doesn't exist, right? This is a conversation that we've had before, just in different formats. You're asking the wrong question. There is no simple cell because it's all relative, not to our personal definitions, but there was nothing at any point you would call the simple cell as you keep going back. You would eventually get to something that's not alive at all.
He won't admit it because it's in defiance to what he believes without evidence. That's the truth.
No, I'm saying it's relative
He won't admit
to
there's
other cells, right? Like some cells are more simple than other cells. Like there are some cells that are more complex. There are some cells that are more simple compared to each other.
And
That's my point.
that most simple cell that you have in your mind right now, is it simple?
Compared to all the other cells, yes. Like, okay, here's an illustration, right? If I say that something is tall, that's a meaningless statement unless you have something else to compare it to. It has to be tall relative to something else. If I say I am tall, that statement has meaning to you because you're comparing it to the average person. Okay? Like these kinds of adjectives only have meaning insofar as they are relative to other things you can compare them to.
But also it can be relative, but also it can be intrinsically complex, which is the simple cell is intrinsically complex.
For simplicity. There's no absolute intrinsic simplicity, complexity, tall, short.
Why can't you just say it? The cells that we know and see are tremendously complex and incredible. Why can't you just say it, Grayson, and admit it? They're fabulous. They're amazing how many different parts and mechanisms go into those little tiny creatures.
Like compared to what?
Just by themselves, intrinsically. I mean, compared to, say, the Ford factory, where you put coal in it and then out comes a car. It is more complex than that. Would you consider the Ford factory simple?
I guess I would consider the Ford factory simple in relation to like a multicellular organism.
Right. So what about a singular cellular organism?
I would probably say that it's more simple than a single cell. Yeah, probably. I don't know enough to like say that authoritatively, but my intuition would say that like a single cell is more complicated than a Ford factory.
Okay. So my point is you just admitted that it's not a simple cell. It's tremendously complex as far as people define simple.
Are you not understanding what I'm saying about how these adjectives, literally by definition, only have meaning in relationship, in comparison to other things?
You just admitted that a singular cellular organism is more complex than the Ford factory where coal enters and a car exits. That's all I wanted to get from you, Grayson. That's it.
Oh, okay. Well, sure.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Right, and I'll just clarify that the last universal common ancestor cell was a lot more simple than any modern cell.
But you don't know that. You've never seen it. It's imaginary. It's a belief.
We do know that because when we talk about the last universal common ancestor, what we're talking about is what genes and what systems are shared by all living cells, right? So we can see what are the shared characteristics, and we know that those must have been present in their universal common ancestor. And we know that all the other modern cells don't just have those systems. They also have more derived traits that are adding complexity that are not shared universally. That's why we know it was more simple.
Again, you're just excluding the possibility that God did it, Grayson, without having any evidence of a simpler cell.
Well, wait, that's
you're
not
you're
what
making
he's saying.
you're jumping to an assumption, an explanation that you haven't observed or tested for with taking God out of the equation.
that's like, no, that's just the concept of natural selection, right? Like if every animal on Earth that was alive right now, single-celled or otherwise, was the product of its parents and its parents and its parents, there's no cell on Earth that would be as simple as a cell that was around, say, 4 billion years ago. It That's exactly the kind of result you would expect. And in the exact same way that we can find common ancestors to big animals by looking at shared traits and mapping out, I mean anything. You can even take it in things for things that everybody believes in, like dog breeds, right? You could see the shared traits and get a map of where that goes. You just do the exact same thing with cells. Cells have evolved to be very different. There's so many different kinds of cells, but some of the traits are universal. So anything that's universal would have to have belonged to a single common ancestor, right? That's sort of how evolution works. It's the same
But that's
thing
tremendously not true, though. That's an assumption. That's just something to fit your worldview without any evidence for it.
Well, I guess
because
the evidence would just be the big, gigantic jigsaw puzzle we see, where for some reason things that the evolution would predict are genetically similar just happen to be more genetically similar than anything else that any other model would predict when you sequence their genome. Grayson, back me up. You know more about this than me. If I'm saying something stupid, let me know. But
yeah, I think P-Town, to address this kind of logic is pretty easy to see, right? Like I don't know if you have any siblings, right? But if you do, or maybe it would be best to illustrate if theoretically you had a half sibling, right? And we wanted to know, who was your parent. We could compare the DNA of you and your half sibling, right? Because you only share one parent, and then you both have a different other parent. And we could see which genes do you have in common with your half sibling. And from that, we would be able to recreate what the genome of your shared parent was, right? That's not just an assumption, like that. We could clearly do that.
Well, how do you know God didn't do that?
We haven't established that DNA isn't just a representation of certain characteristics. My brother looks very similar to me. His DNA is going to probably look very similar to mine. That's so jumping to, this is an example of evolution. You're moving in a direction towards not God explanation instead of God. It's simple. It's just it's simple to me. I mean, but I understand where your logic is going. It's just I don't think that you've opened up the consideration.
The basic logic does not assume creation or evolution or anything. The basic logic is that every single time DNA sequence homology between two people to whatever is indicative of a shared common ancestor, right? Your DNA sequence homology with your brother is indicative that you two shared a common ancestor in your parents. Every time.
You just said exactly what I said, Grayson. Didn't realize it. You just said that this, process by which you're coming up with this, right, isn't the purpose of it isn't towards anything. And that's my point. My point is that you're not looking at it with God in mind, with that being a possibility of an explanation. And anytime you do that, you're going to find something else made up to point you away from it towards nothing doing it, towards a natural position. But just because you're following that mode of logic doesn't make it any more or less right. It's just taking God out of the equation is all you're doing.
But God doesn't have a reason to be in the equation in the first place.
Yeah, there are Christian geneticists that would completely acknowledge the fact that you can do this analysis.
We agree that they have your genes are going to represent, your DNA is going to represent similar characteristics, and you can see it. You can see
do you not believe we could figure out who your parent was between, say, you and several half siblings? Like, do you believe that is not possible?
I believe that you can make it so it's highly probable. Yeah, you can basically decipher ancestry.
Okay. And how far back do you think that's possible, that concept goes? When does that stop working?
Probably when the two people just look completely and are completely different than the other.
Are you familiar with the
You should
concept
bring up the
called
bottleneck. Like,
What was
wasn't
that,
there a
Michael?
bottleneck 2,000 or whatever years ago? Or 6,000 years ago, like a bottleneck where we can actually draw our lineage to a very small set of people who are on the planet. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, even beyond that, the very farthest that you can be related to literally anyone on Earth, like P-Town, like you and like an uncontacted tribesman in the Amazon, the very farthest that you can physically be related is 11th cousins. All right. So you can calculate the shared most recent common ancestor for all of humanity. You can do all these calculations, and you can do it based on DNA sequence homology. There's not a limit based on two people that are very distantly related.
Well, I do want to just, I don't know if this is related, but I do want to bring up the point because someone else did. But it doesn't make sense to me that you can believe a crocodile hasn't evolved for millions of years, and yet you can believe that humans just came in, I don't know what number it is now, 100,000 years ago. Because the
I'd like
point
to
earlier
address
was
this.
made, the point earlier was made, the analogy that you guys yourselves used as an example of how
I'd like to
a
address
cell.
it, actually.
Yeah, okay, go ahead and address it so you know what I'm referring to.
Yes, I know what you're referring to. You're talking about, like, why is like a crocodile or a horseshoe crab virtually unchanged after millions of years, where meanwhile, like, we are and birds or something are relatively recent additions in the evolutionary paradigm. And the answer to that is quite simple, and that is that organisms fulfill ecological niches, right? They adapt to fulfill that niche, right? Like, and the niche is just their role that they play in the environment. And as long as that niche can be occupied, they're going to adapt to be as successful at that role as they possibly can. And if there's no change to that niche, right? Like, if that niche exists throughout for millions of years, and if they're adapted to fulfill that niche, like, as successfully as they can, there's no pressure for them to change. Why would they? Any change is going to be less adapted to that niche. Now, the only pressure that would come from is if something changes that niche. For example, if something else evolves that changes the environment, or if the environment itself changes, like climate change or something like that. If there's a change that will introduce a new evolutionary pressure that will cause a change in that organism. But if the niche doesn't change, there's not going to be any evolutionary pressure for that organism to change.
I get it, Grayson. That's a good possible explanation, but it's still made up. I mean,
it's not made up because we can observe, we can measure, and we can define what niches are in ecological systems. There's an entire study of ecology in the modern era where we can see what niches are being fulfilled by different organisms in their environment.
Sure, but I agree with you. Organisms have amazing niches. I mean, animals have amazing niches. They were made by God, Grayson.
Well,
then what about all the ones that die?
Change their niches as well, and we can see organisms adapt to new niches. For example, there's wolves on the western coast of Canada are being forced by deforestation, and they're losing their hunting grounds, their traditional forests. And what's actually happening is that they're starting to take more to a semi-aquatic lifestyle, and they're spending more and more times. And we've documented how much time they're spending. And they're increasing the amount of time they're spending in the water trying to get fish and turtles and various other things that they can find in the water. And what we have observed is that since the 70s, they've actually gotten more webbing between their toes and more adapted to an aquatic lifestyle. So that's an example of a environmental niche changing and the organism adapting to suit a different niche.
Well, the thing is, wolves still have always had some webbing between their toes.
Yeah, but
it's
we
never
already
new. The only example of
beneficial mutations adding new information with the myelinase. That was my point. In that is that,
and my point is that's your
introduce new information.
And my point is that that's your best explanation of a beneficial mutation, and it's a horrible one compared to, like, just look at the world around us. You don't have a better one than that, Grayson?
It's a pretty damning argument. The only explanation that the creation.com can offer on it is theistic evolution. They just say that God designed organisms in order to mutate and create new information, which is literally theistic evolution. Like, I use that because
You jump
nobody
back
has
to
any rebuttal to it. Like, that's why I like that example, is because
wait,
the
why
only
is it
rebuttal
hard?
that creationists
But
can offer is just theistic evolution.
if you want to, if you say, hey, look, these wolves, their tails are turning into, I don't know, fins or something, or they have scales, like that's a mutation.
We
You know?
wouldn't possibly be alive to see
Hmm.
the timetable it would take for that to happen. So you want fairy dust and magic to prove something tangible and real. We would never, ever see a wolf grow fins or gills in the time that we could possibly document them. We'd be, you and me and our grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren, and about 15 generations down would be dead eons before we started even seeing progress towards that. So what Grayson used was something that can happen now, was something that happened with a material that didn't exist until relatively recently. So no animal on Earth had the genetic potential to eat it, and this animal did. And the thing that I heard people immediately fall back on was shit like it's just carbon, which is, you can just do that for everything. Well, that's not new information.
I didn't like that
Everything
either.
can eat. Everything can eat. It didn't learn anything new. I can eat. It can eat. We can all eat.
Well, you
And,
know,
and then if you do something new from
adaptation.
there, well, it survived. Everybody survives. I can survive. You can survive. It's all just living. You can do this forever, which is why, of course, it's not a good example, because there isn't a good example. It just
There
doesn't
isn't
seem
one.
like you understand this concept enough for any example that would be sufficient for someone who did to please you. That's
This is
just
my
sort of,
this is my perspective though with the webbed feet of the wolves. When you use a particular muscle, and I don't know why how God does it, how some of these animals change. I think it's more than just natural selection, by the way. I don't know why, but that's just the impression I have. But if you just look at a lot of animals, when they start to use, there's a lot of muscles in your hands, right? So like if these wolves are starting to use the webs that which they already have between their toes more because they're going to be adapting to more of an aquatic lifestyle, you guys are going to look at that. Maybe they're just using the muscles. Maybe it's not even changed in their genes. Maybe they're just using those muscles more. You're going to look at it and go, oh, here's evolution.
so what
Like,
are you saying, that like a wolf that didn't have
that's
the
not
webbing
evidence for evolution.
and worked out in the water and swam a whole lot, and then one day it woke up and it had, no, it's grandchildren. It's the grandchildren of its grandchildren that just slowly build up webbing. They're not working the muscles. That's not how passing genes on works, right? No amount of me going to the gym is going to cause my son to be born with a gigantic biceps. It's just not going to happen. That's why it's natural selection. You keep doing this though. You're saying, well,
No,
why
well,
not
the point
God?
I was trying to
Then
make
you
was
invent a misunderstanding of how this works.
it wouldn't surprise me if these scientists went there, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but it wouldn't surprise me. They went there and just measured the wolves, the webbing between their toes. Not the kids when they first come out of the womb, but the actual webbing between the adult toes, and said, "Oh, this is evolution." When there is another explanation for it, they just swim more now. There could be that. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me if the science is literally that corrupt.
Yeah, I don't think that would explain the generational change, right? I mean, it's not like I mean, we're noticing the change over generations. Okay, that's not just from like them using it more. Like
a lot of this is epigenetics. If you change them to a different environment, that trait will go away after a generation or two.
Yeah, because then you've changed the pressures on them to change. Like if
but
you
it's
change
already
environmental
it's already
pressures,
built in the cell to react to the conditions around them.
Yeah, that just sounds like theistic evolution.
There are genes that only
really overgeneralize
like
with theistic evolution,
3 seconds throughout the whole life of a mammal. They're only active for like not 3 seconds, 3 minutes.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Are you saying the wolves get in the water and they have to swim a lot more, and the cells get a signal and they say, well, God made me for this moment, And I sense the
Oh,
water.
no.
Let's start growing the webbing more.
What I was saying is, if you can look at this with like tribes of people and the wilderness who don't use shoes, right? They develop these crazy looking feet that can do crazy things, and it's just because of how much they use their feet and the different muscles in the feet. I was saying, hypothetically, it wouldn't surprise me if these scientists just went up there and measured these hands and looked at these hands of these wolves and well, whoa, look at what evolved. When in reality, it could just very well be they're swimming more. And that way, and because their paws are it was just me just saying, hey, I see science, quote unquote science, like that all the time.
But it frustrates me. You live in this
generations.
speculation, right? Like it wouldn't surprise you that there's a difference between calluses on feet, something that you will grow anyway. Again, there's a difference between me going to the gym and growing my biceps over the next 10 years and my son being born with big giant biceps, right? You will see people grow calluses on their feet. You would see me or you grow calluses on our feet if we went without shoes. You would not see an animal grow webbing before it died, and you did not see that. So what you're saying, it wouldn't surprise you, but you're making up a scenario that would not surprise you. For me, it wouldn't surprise me if Santa Claus came down and gave them extra webbing and sewed it in for them. That wouldn't surprise me either, and the scientists covered it up.
There were fish that lived generations in a cave, and they found them. They couldn't see. They had no sight. And then generations later, or just 1 or 2 generations later, their eyes redeveloped.
I mean, if they had like photosensitive cells that hadn't gone completely, I don't know, Grayson, what's the word for it? Vestigial? That could make sense, but I guess I'd have to see the specific fish you were talking about. I'm sure that we understand the mechanism for how that happened, though. I don't think that they came outside and the sun touched their decaying vestigial eyes.
This was an experiment by.
Can I bring up a question, you guys?
Sure, go for it, Michael.
Relative to this, okay, so like with evolution and the common ancestor, that means that we're all connected, right? And then but the question, actually, I have 2 questions. First of all, why do cells even have a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a motive or reason or inclination to survive in the first place? And the second question is does niche only apply to like singular animals, or does the entire biosphere have like also a niche? You know, like what I mean? Like
so a niche would apply to any particular species, right? Like a apex predator is a niche.
A role,
Yeah, so a niche would not apply to like the biosphere as a whole. I don't think that you would say that life is fulfilling some sort of like greater niche. I've never heard of any discussion like that.
But like,
and then to your first question about the cells having a reason, it's not like they're intrinsically motivated or have a reason for doing what they do. Any self-replicating system will display this behavior, right? Because any system, even just sterile chemicals, right? If they're self-replicating, then they're going to use all the resources that they have at their disposal to replicate as much as possible. Like that is just a result of the chemistry and physics. And
I know what you're saying, man.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree too. But for me, because I got more into physics than I did with biology, but like, so for me, when I look at just space-time matter energy with like a universal constant, creating such self-organizing systems that are so complex, it makes you wonder, even just chemical bonds themselves is really weird. Like, I don't know why things have this tendency to go into lower energy states. It's like as if things are trying to be more efficient and more complex, but I don't know. Probably sounds stupid, but
Well,
Like,
chemical bonds are just explained by the number of valence electrons in orbitals.
yeah,
I mean,
sorry,
I
I'm
also
talking,
love
but
physics.
like,
I'm totally down to have a physics
right,
conversation.
okay. But like, so think of it, like when a chemical bond happens, though, we didn't just all of a sudden like, oh, here's gravity, here's the constants that we understand. We're going to be able to predict which chemical bonds happen, and how they happen. Like we seen them, and then we like kind of cross-referenced it with what we already previously understood. But the overall perspective of it, we really I feel like we don't actually know what's going on. We're just perceiving it. And then re-emulating
we
it,
do.
you know?
We can calculate chemical bonds from quantum mechanics.
Yep,
We can start with basic
but this
principles.
is
We can start with basic
using
principles.
significant figures. We're rounding to get to these, though. This is not like total pure mathematics. So
It's pretty dang close. I mean,
it's close.
You can
It's up to
calculate.
significant
Hold
figures
on.
is what I mean. You know,
You can calculate, right, just based on Pauli's exclusion principle and the number of electrons that you have in an atom. You could calculate what that chemical bond is going to look like and how it's going to behave, like very accurately. Like quantum mechanics makes accurate predictions to like such small decimal places.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you guys know of Professor Dave? Do you guys like him? And or also another question: have you guys heard of Michael Levin?
I've heard of Michael Levin. I haven't watched anything that he's done. I'm not that super aware. I've just heard the name. Professor Dave is fine. He's kind of a dick, but you know, he makes videos on lots of different interesting content. You know, he generally is pretty knowledgeable.
Stays honest. I like that part. Yeah. I think Michael Levin might be up for a Nobel Prize, actually. And I listened to him, and he is awesome. It's very, very interesting shit that he does. Like they were talking about how they could take a single frog cell, or they would make, you know, like they get a single tadpole cell, and they would mix up something in it, and they would call it Picasso. You know, like Picasso. What is a frog as its first version? Like, you know, Picasso tadpoles or whatever. They'd mix up their eyeballs and do all this crazy stuff, and then they'd grow them, and all of the stuff would come back to the original, or like the place that it's supposed to be. It was interesting.
Oh yeah, he has the I think that might have been with nematodes or worms or something. I think I have actually some familiarity with what you're talking about. He has a theory about like the electrical signaling that is involved in like body plan formation, which I think is very interesting. I mean, I'd be happy to see that research come to fruition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if anyone has anything else that they want to add, I mean, if we're kind of running out of wind in our sails for this conversation, then I can go ahead and wrap up the stream.
Yeah, I'll probably be heading to bed soon too. It was very interesting talking to you guys, or like listening to you.
Yeah, well, much appreciated. Like I said, this is my first time live streaming. I plan on doing more of these after shows in the future. So, you know, I hope that, you know, you guys generally felt that your questions were heard and that we had a good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have a good night, Grayson, guys.
Good night.
Y'all. Peace out.